In a world where trust and maintenance is paramount, what if an airplane labeled fixed was only patched up to fly another day? Imagine a modern jet confronting the same glitch flight after flight. Mechanics following standard checklists, engineers granting the green light, and pilots trusting in those sign-offs. Meanwhile, subtle red flags keep popping up unheeded. One fateful morning, these repeated quick fixes come at a dire cost. And the tragedy that unfolds summons a haunting deja vu of Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302. Could a hidden software function, quietly overriding pilot commands, be the missing link? By sifting through maintenance logs, pilot accounts, and the procedures meant to guarantee safety, we may uncover the high price paid for ignoring persistent warnings. In this account, we explore how a chain of overlooked details converge into one of aviation's starkest wake-up calls. Stay tuned. There's more to this story than meets the eye. A routine takeoff, until it wasn't at 6:21 a.m., Flight 610 roared down the runway and lifted into the Jakarta morning sky. To observers on the ground, it was a standard departure under clear conditions. But inside the cockpit, moments after takeoff, Captain Sineja sensed trouble. The plane's controls felt off. Certain cockpit alerts and warnings were popping up. He reported technical difficulties to Air Traffic Control, ATC, and requested permission to return to the airport. The strange part, he did not declare an actual emergency. In aviation, a formal mayday or pan-pan call would have given immediate landing priority. Instead, the request to return to base sounded more like a precaution than a dire situation. For an audience far away, especially those of us in the United States accustomed to dramatic calls of Mayday, it might sound unusual, but it may have been the result of confusion in the cockpit or a belief that they could still stabilize the flight. Behind the scenes, flight data trackers watched the aircraft's speed fluctuate. Seconds turned to minutes and the plane, instead of ascending steadily, dipped multiple times. It accelerated unexpectedly and then abruptly lost altitude. Signs of a serious control problem. Roughly 13 minutes after takeoff, ATC lost contact. People on the ground initially wondered if the plane had simply flown out of radar coverage. But soon, horrific news began to emerge. Lion Air Flight 610 had crashed into the Java Sea, carrying 189 souls with it. If you found value in today's video, please hit that like button and share this story with friends who might be interested. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss future deep dives and updates. Your support helps us bring more in-depth content and keep important conversations alive. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Shockwaves across the globe almost immediately. The tragedy made headlines internationally. For many Americans who heard the news, a question arose. How does a brand new Boeing 737 MAX, supposedly one of the most advanced jets in service, end up at the bottom of the sea? Boeing, an iconic U.S. aerospace manufacturer, had long promoted the 737 MAX as a milestone in efficiency and safety. Lion Air, meanwhile, was Indonesia's largest low-cost carrier, known for ambitious growth and cheap fares. But it had a mixed safety history, runway overruns, minor collisions on the tarmac, and even a crash off Bali in 2013. Still, the magnitude of losing an entire flight so suddenly was an unprecedented gut punch, even for an airline accustomed to bad headlines. Families, journalists, and aviation experts demanded answers. Within days, search and rescue teams recovered debris, body parts, and luggage. Floating in the Java Sea, the sorrow was overwhelming. Many relatives gathered at the airport, clutching photographs of loved ones. They found themselves thrust into a grim reality that no one ever wants to face. Mechanical warnings ignored, the grief quickly gave way to urgent questions about the airplane's condition. According to Lion Air President Edward Surrate, the aircraft had experienced a technical problem on its prior flight from Bali to Jakarta. The crew that night reported issues with airspeed and altitude readings. Maintenance logs confirmed a fix, but what precisely was done? And why was the plane cleared to fly again so soon? A further wrinkle emerged. Passengers on that earlier flight described a disturbing roller coaster feel as the plane climbed and dipped erratically. Some recalled the engines making unusual sounds, while the cabin got uncomfortably warm from a lack of air conditioning. By the time it landed in Jakarta, multiple warnings should have signaled a deeper investigation. And yet, the next morning, it was business as usual. Flight 610 boarded with minimal delay. In many respects, it was a snapshot of the issues that plague some fast-growing airlines. Rapid turnarounds, intense schedule demands, and reliance on short repair windows. The Boeing 737 MAX and MCAS, as the story reached American shores, a critical technical term, soon dominated the conversation. MCAS, Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System. Why MCAS? The 737 MAX, in essence, is an updated version of Boeing's long-proven 737 line. But the MAX sports bigger, more fuel-efficient engines that sit higher and further forward under the wing. This shift altered the airplane's flight characteristics, especially during steep climbs. Boeing developed MCAS to ensure the plane wouldn't pitch its nose up too much, risking a stall. Reliance on a single sensor MCAS takes data primarily from an angle of attack, AOA, sensor. If the sensor indicates an abnormally high angle, MCAS automatically nudges the nose downward. But if that sensor reads incorrectly, for example, if it's damaged or feeding faulty numbers, MCAS might keep pushing the nose down even when there's no stall risk. In older jets, pilots were extensively trained on runaway stabilizer scenarios. Yet Boeing hadn't highlighted MCAS in the 737 MAX training manuals. Many pilots, including those at Lion Air, reportedly didn't know the system could activate so aggressively. What went wrong on Flight 610 investigations soon suggested that the plane's AOA sensor might have been faulty from the previous flight. That morning, MCAS could have been receiving false data, prompting it to push the nose down repeatedly. Captain Saneja, unaware that an unfamiliar software was overriding his commands, might have recognized only that the trim system was acting crazy. Meanwhile, as he and the first officer tried to rectify it, crucial minutes slipped away. A grim discovery in the Java Sea search teams worked day and night under heavy media coverage. Navy divers eventually found wreckage scattered on the seabed, quickly ruling out any chance of survivors. They recovered body bags of human remains, heartbreakingly incomplete in many cases. Attention turned to finding the black boxes, the cockpit voice recorder, CVR, and the flight data recorder, FDR. These devices can withstand extreme impact and were crucial for piecing together the final moments of Flight 610. After some days of hunting through debris, divers pulled the FDR from beneath the muddy seafloor. It revealed that the airspeed indicator and angle of attack readings had been erroneous on the flight's last 4 segments. But the CVR remained elusive for a while, complicating efforts to hear the pilot's direct voices during those fatal minutes. Once found, it painted a harrowing picture of confusion, repeated nose-down commands, and exasperated calls to return to Jakarta. For investigators, these recordings were both heartbreaking and illuminating. Lion Air's checkered past for an American audience. Lion Air might not be a household name, but in Southeast Asia, it's the largest privately owned airline in Indonesia, with a low-cost model that had fueled massive expansion. Unfortunately, it also faced significant safety criticisms. Multiple runway incidents, planes clipping wings or overrunning the runway, pilot drug arrests, incidents between 2011 and 2012 where some Lion Air pilots were caught with illegal substances. 2013 Bali crash. A Lion Air 737 overshot the runway, splashing into the sea just off the coast. Fortunately, no fatalities occurred, but the airplane was split in two. Despite these blemishes, Lion Air continued growing, placing large orders for the new 737 MAX. The airline's co-founder insisted they were committed to safety, but the tragedy of Flight 610 reignited scrutiny, both locally and worldwide. Legal repercussions and the Boeing controversy in the United States, aviation attorneys took notice. Firms like Baum, Hedlund, Aristide, and Goldman represent families in international aviation disasters, including those involving Boeing, Honeywell, and Rolls-Royce. They were soon retained by at least one family from Flight 610, and later, several families from the Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 crash that would occur just a few months later under eerily similar circumstances. Questions surfaced. Did Boeing fail to disclose vital details about MCAS to the airlines and pilots? Why rely on a single angle of attack sensor for such a critical function? Were cost savings and swift certification overshadowing thorough pilot training? Internal Boeing communications that surfaced in 2019 and 2020 revealed employees mocking the MAX design, calling it built by clowns, and even expressing personal unease about flying on it. In January 2021, the U.S. Justice Department criminally charged Boeing with conspiracy to defraud the FAA. The settlement included a payment of $2.5 billion, part of which was intended for families of the Lion Air and Ethiopian Airlines victims. Yet for many of those families, Indonesian, American, Ethiopian, and others, no sum could truly compensate for the unimaginable loss. The lawsuit sought not just money but accountability and changes within Boeing's corporate structure. Grieving relatives, some from small villages in Indonesia, found themselves entangled in complex international litigation, determined that their loved ones' deaths not be in vain. A near missed a day before one revelation stunned investigators. An off-duty pilot in the jump seat had reportedly saved the same Lion Air jet a day earlier under similar circumstances. According to leaked reports, the plane again showed signs of nose-down trim. This extra pilot advised the operating crew to cut power to the electric trim motor, stabilizing the aircraft. That near accident was never thoroughly documented, and the fix apparently wasn't carried over in the logbook for the next day's crew. In aviation, consistent record keeping is crucial. Each flight's anomalies feed into the next crew's awareness. The breakdown of that chain of information cast a harsh light on Lion Air's procedures. Officials eventually admitted that more should have been done to correct the underlying sensor fault before the plane's next departure. MCAS and the bigger picture, as horrific as the Lion Air crash was, it would not stand alone. Less than 5 months later, another Boeing 737 MAX 8, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302, crashed shortly after takeoff near Addis Ababa, killing everyone on board. The parallels were disturbing. A new 737 MAX, potential MCAS misreadings, a frantic struggle in the cockpit. Worldwide aviation authorities grounded the entire 737 MAX fleet, leading to intense scrutiny of Boeing's design, training manuals, and relationship with the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA. Some critics claimed the FAA had delegated too much oversight to Boeing itself. The House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure later published a blistering report alleging repeated and serious failures by both Boeing and the FAA. For Americans, the grounding of the 737 MAX meant flights were canceled or shifted to different aircraft. Southwest, American, and United, major U.S. airlines operating the MAX, had to reshuffle schedules, incurring tremendous costs. Boeing halted production of the MAX in December 2019 until further notice. The entire ordeal was as much a corporate scandal as it was a grave safety crisis, underscoring that mistakes in design or oversight can have global repercussions. Searching for closure. Demanding change for families who lost parents, children, and relatives on Flight 610. Life changed forever. Indonesia's National Search and Rescue Agency spent weeks recovering remains, while grief-stricken loved ones submitted DNA samples to identify them. One passenger's body was found, another was not. Devastating heartbreak that lingered. Some reported feeling pressured by Lion Air to accept minimal compensation in exchange for signing legal waivers. In the U.S., law firms challenged these so-called release and discharge forms. They argued that no airline should require victims' families to sign away rights while still in the throes of grief. Advocacy groups insisted on more transparent negotiations and a fair judicial process. Meanwhile, the Indonesian government vowed to inspect all Boeing 737 MAX aircraft operated by Lion Air and Garuda Indonesia, looking for any sign of similar flaws. For a time, the Australian government recommended its officials avoid flying Lion Air altogether, citing safety concerns. Lessons in aviation safety: every aviation accident reshapes the industry's approach to safety. Here are some core takeaways from the Lion Air crash. 1. Redundancy in critical systems: a single sensor dependency for MCAS proved catastrophic. Regulators now require cross-checking from multiple AOA sensors on the 737 MAX, ensuring one faulty reading doesn't trigger repeated nose-down commands. 2. Pilot training and transparency: pilots must fully understand any automated system that can override manual inputs. The Lion Air crash illustrated that ignorance of MCAS and how to shut it off in an emergency scenario left crews at a dire disadvantage. 3. Maintenance culture when repeated anomalies occur, like erratic airspeed or altitude warnings. Airlines must conduct thorough inspections rather than quick fixes. Proper documentation ensures continuity of information from one flight to the next. 4. Regulatory oversight: the FAA came under fire for delegating parts of the certification process to Boeing. Industry experts urge deeper, independent checks on new aircraft or major updates to older models. 5. Open communication: failing to declare an emergency can waste precious minutes. Had Flight 610 declared a formal emergency, ADC might have cleared the path for an immediate return. Transparency from both pilots and controllers is vital in crisis situations. The aftermath for Boeing: financially and reputationally, Boeing took a massive hit. Lawsuits piled up. Airlines canceled or deferred MAX orders. Public trust wavered, especially after scathing internal memos and revelations that Boeing employees had openly criticized the plane's design. By November 2020, the FAA cleared the 737 MAX to return to service after software upgrades to MCAS, revised manuals, and mandated pilot training modules. American Airlines reinstated MAX flights soon after, while Southwest and United introduced them more gradually. Travelers, however, remained cautious. Many airlines offered the option to switch flights if passengers felt uneasy about flying on a MAX aircraft. In 2021, Boeing's settlement with the U.S. Department of Justice included the creation of a $500 million fund for heirs and relatives of those lost in the Ethiopian Airlines and Lion Air crashes. Boeing's then CEO left the company amid the crisis, replaced by leadership promising a culture of transparency. Whether these changes can repair Boeing's once sterling reputation remains an open question. If you found value in today's video, please hit that like button and share this story with friends who might be interested. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss future deep dives and updates. Your support helps us bring more in-depth content and keep important conversations alive. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Quiet echoes. Remembering the victims in the background of corporate headlines and regulatory tussles, the 189 lives on Flight 610 resonate the loudest. Some victims were Indonesian civil servants commuting weekly to Pangkal Pinang. Others were children anticipating a family reunion. Their stories, captured in news reports, highlight the profound human cost. One might reflect on how the tragedy impacted tiny fishing villages along the Java Sea. With minimal resources, local fisherfolk and authorities banded together for recovery efforts. Families had to cope with partial remains, uncertain if they'd ever lay their loved ones to rest. For Americans reading this, or for anyone who has ever boarded a plane without second thought, the crash underscores aviation's delicate balance between cutting-edge technology and human error, between corporate profit and regulatory duty, between pilot skill and software-driven automation. renewed hope and vigilance international aviation remains one of the safest modes of travel, thanks to stringent checks, technology, and well-trained personnel. But the Lion Air 610 and Ethiopian Airlines 302 disasters forced a hard reckoning. If design flaws go unaddressed, or if companies prioritize cost over thorough testing, disasters can happen again. Ultimately, the tragedy of Flight 610 spurred more robust software updates to the 737 MAX, addressing MCAS logic and adding sensor redundancy, improved training for pilots, ensuring they understand how and when to disable automated trim, heightened regulatory scrutiny, including how manufacturers present new systems to the FAA, a greater industry awareness about balancing innovation with responsibility. For Boeing, lessons learned must go beyond retooling the 737 MAX. It's about corporate accountability and the moral obligation to place safety above everything else. For Lion Air, it's a reminder that a low-cost model does not excuse cutting corners when alarms ring repeatedly. Closing thoughts. Carrying their memory as we reflect on the dawn that ended in heartbreak for Flight 610, it's impossible not to think of the passengers and crew who had no chance to say goodbye. They boarded a plane believing they'd land safely in Pankal Pinning within the hour. Instead, they became part of a painful chapter in aviation history. Their memory lives on in ongoing conversations about safety reforms. Each simulator scenario that trains a pilot on uncommanded nose-down inputs, each updated FAA guideline on autonomous systems, and each thorough pre-flight inspection stands as a quiet testament to those 189 souls. For viewers, especially American audiences used to seeing Boeing jets as an emblem of reliability, this tragedy might feel deeply unsettling. Yet, telling these stories, dissecting the missteps, and pushing for change is precisely how aviation grows safer. In the end, we owe it to the victims of Lion Air Flight 610, their loved ones, and every passenger who places their trust in commercial aviation each day. Thank you for reading. And may we never forget the lessons paid for with lives on that October morning over the Java Sea.